طيب بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Amma ba'd. I commence in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. I send salutations of prayers and peace upon the finality of prophets and messengers, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and all who follow him in righteousness until the day of judgment. Brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, today we have an important program for you, inshallah ta'ala, the importance of the Islamic will, alhamdulillah. And we have our beloved brother, Shaykh Joe Bradford, inshallah ta'ala. I'm going to read a little bit of his bio, inshallah ta'ala, and then we'll get started. Shaykh Joe Bradford is an entrepreneur and an American scholar of Islam. He holds a Master of Islamic Law from the University of Medina and has studied traditionally in the Muslim world for the past 20 plus years. He was a VP and senior Sharia consultant at Al-Rajhi Bank, the largest Islamic bank in the Middle East. Joe is sought after as the ethical finance advisor to individuals and institutions at home and abroad. Sheikh Joe is one of the few experts on issues involving Muslims and finance in North America. While his expertise spans many areas, he has focused his efforts on creating companies that allow people of faith and conviction to align their values with their finances. As a co-founder of MyWasiya.com, he has leveraged his extensive knowledge of Islamic inheritance to create a world-class product that bridges the gap between traditional Islamic knowledge and requirements of the U.S. legal system. As Sharia advisor to Zoya.finance, Joe has contributed in bringing values to life, creating an app that makes halal investing easy by helping you build and monitor a Sharia-compliant investment portfolio with confidence and clarity. As the principal of Money Coach or MoneyCoa.ch, Joe works with businesses and individuals to build a comprehensive overview of finance, health, goals, and values, allowing his clients to take the steps needed to achieve financial success and align their businesses and personal finances to their values as Muslims. And mashallah, barakallahu feek for being here with us today, Sheikh Joe, and
my pleasure.
discussing with us this very important topic, especially for us as Muslims, inshallah, as converts to Islam, who oftentimes don't have wills and don't have Muslim family members, and our rights get lost in the process of all of that. So, فليتفضل مشكورا, Sheikh Joe Bradford.
Jazakallah khair. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. So the issue of estate planning and inheritance is paramount. Maybe if we can have the others mute while we're
just unmute yourself, Sheikh Joe. There you go.
Okay, gotcha. So I want to be very real about this topic. We have an ideal that we strive to as Muslims, and we have a reality that we live as Americans, as converts, as humans. Our attempt should be to implement as much as possible from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obliged us to implement. Now, that said, that means that there will always be challenges. There will always be issues that will not necessarily align completely. A lot of people are not concerned about the topic of estate planning, which is the idea that you plan for the money that you leave behind, i.e. your estate, for something to be done with it. They don't think about this because there is an assumption that it's going to be done for you, or that I don't have anything of importance, so it's not really that big of an issue, or that I'm a Muslim, so they'll take care of it in the way that's best for me as a Muslim. Unfortunately, that's not the case. If you live in the United States and you do not have a properly drafted will, then the state will determine what is done with your body, what is done with your wealth, what is done with your children, and a lot of that you're not going to like. How can you, as a Muslim, offset that? is by leveraging the ability under the legal system to essentially draft an agreement, a contract, a will, a document, which allows you to have your values implemented when it's time for your burial, when it's time to distribute your money, when it's time to give charity, when it's time to assign guardianship to of your children to someone else. If you do not do this, then it's going to be done for you. So the importance of estate planning in general, in the context that we live in, is you can take care of your loved ones after you die. Your wealth will go to the people that you want it to go to. You can achieve your personal goals even after you're gone. If you want to give charity or something, you can do that. And for your family that's left behind, you can significantly decrease the amount of taxes that they would have to pay on the money that you pass to them, if they would at all. Now, this starts with a few core principles. We're talking right now, we're talking about, the pragmatic, the practical side, the lived reality. There's a few principles that we follow when we talk about proper estate planning. Number one is understanding yourself, understanding your personal and your family goals, understanding your own budget and the needs that you have. Second is understanding the applicable laws of the state or even the county that you live in. You don't have to go and become a lawyer, but you should understand what is and is not available to you. And then thirdly, you should start early. Start thinking about this now. One of the most difficult conversations that people do not want to have is the conversation about death. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Akthiru min hadhim al-ladhat, ay al-maut." He ﷺ said, remember much that which cuts off your pleasures, i.e. death. A lot of times people think of this in a macabre, sort of morbid fashion. Like, oh, I'm just going to remember death and I'm going to give up the dunya. You're remembering death not because you want to be morbid or not because you want to be depressive or not because you are afraid of it, right? But the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Aisha in the Sahih, "Man ahabba Allahu liqa'ahu ahabba Allahu liqa'ah." Whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet him. So you're remembering death because that is the demarcation line between this life and the next. It is where your akhirah starts. And it's also the last leg in the last line in which you're able to do anything else. إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث صدقة جارية أو علم نافع ينتفع به أو ولد صالح يدعو له. The Prophet ﷺ said, when the son of Adam dies, his actions are cut off except for three: a charity given in perpetuity, but knowledge which is benefited from, or a child which makes dua for him, a righteous child that makes dua for him. So we want to remember death not as something that we're afraid of, but we want to remember death as something that we're prepared for. Something that we know, okay, if I'm going to die one day, I need to be working on beneficial knowledge. I need to be working on giving charity in a way that's going to have an effect after my lifetime. I need to be inculcating my values of righteousness and faith into my children so that they'll raise their hands in dua and they won't be burdened by having to follow up on my finances after I die, and instead they can take that time in giving sadaqah and doing the janazah and praying and so on and so forth. So, with these principles, what should you prepare for? What's going to happen when you die? Okay, your debts are going to be paid, and I'm just talking in general right now. Your debts are going to be paid. There's going to be funeral costs. There are going to be things that you would have wanted to say to your relatives, or they might have wanted to hear from you. There's going to be custody of your children, guardianship of your children that's going to pass. So if a spouse survives, the custody passes to them. If no parent is alive, guardianship changes or switches to whoever you choose. There's going to be trusts to put the money that you leave those children in so that it's saved for them until they're 18. And then there's going to be a distribution of your charitable gifts and the distribution of your inheritance. Now, a good estate plan should do all of these things. It should take care of your children's guardianship, your charitable gifting to both individuals or organizations, your family directives. It should dispose of your property in the way that you see fit. So, is there such thing as Islamic estate planning? Should we as Muslims be worried about this in the grand sense, not just the will? The will is the cornerstone of estate planning. But there are other documents, I'll tell you about those in a minute. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتُ إِن تَرَكَ خَيْرًا الْوَصِيَّةُ لِلْوَالِدَيْنِ وَالْأَقْرَبِينَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُتَّقِينَ. Prescribed for you, when any of you is visited by death, and he leaves behind some goods, is to make a testament in favor of his parents and kinsmen honorably, an obligation on the God-fearing. This is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 181. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it an obligation upon you that you take into consideration what's going to happen to you, your body, your wealth, and your family after you die. In the hadith of Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas in Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam visited him while he was on his deathbed, what he thought was his deathbed. He actually lived past this moment. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, inna li malun kathir, wa mali illa ibnatun wahida. أَفَأَتَصَدَّقُ بِمَالِي كُلَّهُ. O Messenger of Allah, I have a lot of money and I only have one daughter. Should I give all of my money in charity? He said, no. Should I give 2/3 of it in charity? He said, no. Should I give half of it in charity? He said, no. Should I give 1/3 of it in charity? He said, 1/3, and yet 1/3 is still much. For you to leave your family wealthy is better than to leave them poor, begging of people. Notice that the Prophet ﷺ here says you should be intending to leave your family in a good situation. None of the fake piety, they'll have Allah, and we don't, and while we're saying that, we're not obeying Allah in preparing ourselves for that day. Our families are burdened by our deaths instead of being, instead of praying for our mercy, they're having second thoughts. We don't want to be a burden at that time. We have an obligation to take care of these things in this life. So, kutiba alaykum, prescribed for you. This is an obligation from Allah. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, he said, لا يحل لمسلم عنده ما يوصى به أو ما يوصي به أن يبيت ليلتين إلا ووصيته مكتوبة عنده أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. It's not permissible for any Muslim who has something to will to stay for 2 nights without having his will written and ready with him. This means that if you have, if I see this, people say to me all the time, but I don't have money, I don't have investments. I was talking to someone earlier today about one of my financial planning clients. And they were saying how, I asked, why is it that you never invested your entire life? You're in your 40s now. And they said, well, I just thought investments were something the rich people did. I didn't know that I could do that. A lot of times we think of estate planning as something that only people with means can do, not as a religious obligation for us. Now, you might say to yourself, I don't have money, I don't have a house, I don't have kids, I'm not even married. So when I lived in Orlando years ago, there was a case that came up at the masjid. Young man hit by a car while walking down a dark street in the middle of the night, walking home. No identification, nothing. Picked up by the city. Body sat in the morgue for more than a month and a half almost. They could not identify him. Somebody said, well, hey, he looks like he's from this country. Find people that might be from that country. And they basically had to, by a process of elimination, finally find somebody that, he looks like he could be from this tribe, because in that tribe, people in my country are Muslims. I'm a Christian. Go talk to the Muslims. They came to the masjid. The masjid said, oh, yes, we know that. It's Brother Muhammad. Well, okay, give us the body. We'll bury him. We'll take care of all of the expenses. Sorry, we can't do that. We can only release his body to his next of kin. Did he leave a will with you? Said, no. Did he have a will in his apartment? No. Well, then we can't release his body. Eventually, after his body sat there for so long, one of the brothers, alhamdulillah, went to the city, negotiated with with the administration, basically said, I'll take personal liability for anything that goes wrong. Just give us the man's body and allow us to bury him as a Muslim. And they did. That didn't have to happen, or that doesn't have to happen to you if you have a will in place. Another situation here in Houston. Brother accepts Islam, working for a Muslim, passes away. That Muslim takes him, buries him as a Muslim. A week later, his family shows up from some small town in the middle of Texas, sues the masjid, sues his former employer, sues the city, and asks for his body to be de-interned, to be taken out of the ground so he can be buried as a Christian. Why? Because there was no will in place that designated who should bury the body. So even if you have only your body, that is enough of an amana from Allah that you should take this topic seriously, and that you should have something in place that takes care of that. Now, when you pass away under Islamic law, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of Muslims have not paid attention to this when coming from Muslim majority countries, because in Muslim majority countries, these are kind of done by default. Your family pays your debts for you. Nobody steps in and stops them. Funeral expenses are either taken care of because there's a waqf, an endowment that takes care of that, or the families have a family graveyard. Your children are taken in by their family and they're assigned by right of the Sharia to the family members that get custody of them or guardianship of them. Here in the United States, none of that applies. If it's not in a document, the state's going to step in and be an authoritarian and tell you what's going to happen. So when you pass away, you're going to leave property. And Islamically, the first thing that's paid are your unpaid debts, your funeral expenses, then any gifts that you had given to individuals or organizations are taken out. And then the last portion of that is your remainder estate, your mirath. And that is what is divided up amongst your family members per the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has mentioned in the Quran. Now, the funeral expenses and the debts must be paid before any inheritance is distributed. And they should be paid out of the estate before the inheritance. So the debts and the funeral expenses should be paid out of the estate before the inheritance is distributed. Now, you can offset that by pre-purchasing a funeral plan, but if you haven't taken care of that, it will be a debt that will be waiting there for you, and will be waiting. And sometimes they won't even allow you to be buried unless you have actually paid for it. Now, a big question that comes up with the sisters is, if you married and your husband did not pay you your entire mahar, your mahar is a debt that he owes you that must be paid from his money before inheritance is given to anyone. So you have a primary right over that money as a debtor, as a creditor, as someone that he owes money to, before anything else is paid to anyone. And that doesn't diminish the amount of money that you get from the inheritance in any way. You still get the percentage that Allah has set out for you. So I have seen this in families where they'll say, well, we'll give you the mahar, but we're not going to give you the inheritance. We'll give you the inheritance, we're not going to give you the mahar. Even if your mahar took up all of the money that was left and there was nothing left for inheritance, that's your right before the inheritance is given out. Because Allah says, min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn, after a charitable gift and debts are paid. Now, charitable gifting is the area that's known as wasiyah. And so sometimes people get confused and they think that the wasiyah is just the inheritance or it's just the gifting. It's usually used for both of these terms. However, when we're talking about inheritance, mirath, then the wasiyah would be the charitable gifting portion. What is it? It's an unrestricted recipient. You can give to any recipient you want, up to 1/3 of your total estate left after paying off debts. So if you had $100,000 when you died, and you owed funeral costs were 10, and you owed 20,000, you're left with 70,000. Then you could take 30%, or say 33% of that 70,000, and you basically can give up to $23,100 away in charity or as gifts to anybody that you want. Now, I want to sidebar here. For those of us who are converts, and as you know, myself, I accepted Islam in 1991. And many of us, we still have non-Muslim relatives. Our scholarly tradition states that yes, la wasiyata liwarith, there is no charitable gift to be given to an inheritor, unless it is approved by the rest of the inheritors. Now, the inverse of that is that if a person is not an inheritor, they can receive a charitable gift. So who should receive a charitable gift? Well, the scholarly tradition, all the different schools of Islam say that if a person has a relative who normally would not be able to inherit from them because they're not an inheritor, like a cousin that you grew up with, like a brother or sister, or a parent who's not a Muslim, or a sibling who's not, or anyone that's excluded, you should apportion some of your charitable gift to them. So, for example, you write your will, and you've got all your Muslim family, and you've been Muslim for years, but mom is still not Muslim. Then you say in your will, I want 5% of my estate to go to my mother. And that's a gift that goes to her before any inheritance is given out. Doesn't detract from what anybody else gets, but you make sure to let those people know that you care for them and that you're leaving something for them. You can also give that, that amount up to 33%. You can also give that amount to organizations. So, for example, this is another issue that comes up for us as converts, especially with charitable gifting. Someone says, hey, I accepted Islam. I don't have any Muslim family. I've never been married. I don't have any children. And I live by myself. Who's going to inherit from me? Traditionally, in an Islamic land, your 1/3 of your money could go to whomever you wanted, and the other 2/3 would be taken by the state and distributed amongst the poor and the needy. Here in the United States, we don't have any authorities that will do that for you. So if you're in this situation, what do you do? And again, the scholarly tradition addresses this, that you can give up to 100% of everything you own away to charitable gifting, whether that be to individuals, organizations, categories like the poor and the needy, whatever it may be, because you don't have any inheritors and you don't have anyone to take that from you. Now, another type of recipient of charitable gifting can be an organization like a masjid or an Islamic center or a dawah center, right? And you can give to them as an organization. Now, after all of that is distributed, now we have, that, after our $23,100, we have, we take that out and we have $46,900 left after paying debts, paying funeral costs, giving out 1/3 to different charities and Quran schools and friends and non-Muslim relatives and whomever else. Now that $46,900 out of the 100 is going to be divided up amongst our family. Now, one important point that I should mention before this: you don't have to give 1/3 of anything to anyone. It's not an obligation; it's a choice. So if you don't want to give to a masjid, you don't want to give to an individual, you don't want to give to a relative, you want to leave everything that you can for your children and your wife and your husband and anyone who will directly inherit from you, that's your choice. You're not obligated to give a charitable gift, the wasiyah, but you can. So if you have that money left over after all of those things, then this is where the rules that are found in the Quran apply. So there are 3 people that can't inherit from this portion. the person who's guilty of murdering the deceased if he was murdered or she was murdered, a person who is enslaved because they are under the control of someone else who will take that money, and a person who has a different faith. لا يتوارث أهل ملتين شتى. Two people of different faiths do not inherit from another. The Prophet ﷺ said, you can give a gift, but they won't get the 1/8, 1/4, 1/2, whatever that may be, that's designated in the Quran. That's only for Muslim family members. Non-Muslim family members can get anything up to 1/3 of the gift that you decide how much you're going to give. Now, of those that inherit in the Quran, there are some that take on a percentage, and there are others that take whatever's left after that percentage. And there's a lot of details that go into that, which I think are probably better for a longer class rather than, a lecture like this. But what are the requirements for you to take this knowledge and implement it in the United States? When you write a will, can you put all of this stuff into a will in the United States? A lot of people don't, because they think, well, I'm Muslim and they don't like Islam and they're not going to let me, so I'm not going to do it. And that can't be further from the truth. If you are mentally competent and you're not being influenced or forced by anyone else, and the way that your document is drafted conforms with state law, you can leave anything to anyone and do anything that you want. There are people that leave their entire estates to their dog. Do you mean to tell me that you can't leave your estate to who's set to inherit from you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rules? You can, and it's very possible. So writing a valid will, legally valid will, can be legally valid and Islamically sound. It is very, very possible, and it is done all the time. Now, how do you get a will? There are three main ways to get a will. One is called a holographic will, and it's not what you think, and it's not, seeing, Princess Leia on the R2-D2, holograph. It's not that. Holographic means that it's been handwritten. So what you do is you take out a piece of paper and a pen and you write, I, Joe Bradford, leave my property of, and you mention your property to my relatives, XYZ, so and so forth, and to be distributed according to, the rules of Islamic inheritance as outlined in the Quran. And then you sign it, and you sign it like you would sign a check, and you date it. And then you take a voided check and you sign that and you leave it together. You now have a legally enforceable document. If you die tonight, okay, if you don't have a will, this is the fastest, easiest way for you to have a will. Get out a piece of paper, write down yourself, your name, your address, what you want to happen to your money and your kids and everything else. Sign it like you sign a check and date it. Put something else with your proof of signature in there. If you die tonight and your family has to take that document to a court tomorrow, the court will say, well, we're looking at this handwritten will and we're looking at another sample of their handwriting. Looks the same. We accept it. Whoever they named to do this, take care of it. You name an administrator that will go and implement that, and it's taken care of. That's the very first, easiest, and quickest way. And I'll be honest with you, for many years, I actually lived with one of those in my top drawer because I didn't have any other options. The second option is that you go to a local lawyer and you ask them to draft a will. Now, the challenge with using a local lawyer, even if they are Muslim, is that sometimes they will say, well, I can do the Islamic will for you. But the only thing Islamic about it is that it's a state-approved will that says property must be distributed according to the Sharia by so-and-so. Now, that in and of itself can be challenged because it's just not enough information for the courts to say, yes, that can happen. Some lawyers do a great job, some don't. So there's some risk there, and it can be potentially pricey. Now, the third way is to use a site like MyWasiyah. MyWasiyah.com is a site that I am a co-founder of, and we created because I myself was faced with these types of issues. My partner, Muhammad, co-founder as well, he was faced with these types of issues. He's a corporate and estate planning attorney. I'm considered a resource and an expert in Islamic law. People would come to me and say, I need a will. I would say, I can do it, but I can't draft it for you legally. They would come to him and say, I need an Islamic will. He said, I can draft it for you legally, but I'm not a scholar. So we put our minds together and we created an online interview process that gives you a Sharia compliant, legally valid will in all 50 states of the US. Unfortunately, we have not expanded to other countries yet, so it will not work in other countries. But if you're in the US and you have property in the US, you can protect it Islamically and legally by using this service. And it's only $75 for the basic will. We wanted to get away from people paying hundreds, even thousands of dollars to be able to protect something that they've been ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect. So these are the three ways that you can get a will. Holographic will, write it down yourself. Number two, go to a local lawyer. Or number three, use a service like mywasiya.com. Now, what are other documents that should be considered by you when you're writing an estate plan? So your will handles your burial, your debts, your charity, your inheritance given out to your family, and it handles the guardianship of your children or the custody of your children. Note, this comes up a lot. So people say, well, I'm divorced, and if I die, I don't want my children going to my ex because I hate them. Well, first of all, harsh. Second of all, under the law, unless that person has been deemed unfit to care for your children, then children of a deceased person go to the surviving parent, regardless of who that is. Now, if you don't have anyone to care for, or that person says, I don't want to care for my own children, then you have to assign a guardian. And you can assign a guardian through a will, and that can be essentially whoever's going to be best for caring for the children. Now, what else should your Islamic estate plan include? So we said the will covers all of those things: debts, funeral costs, burial, inheritance, guardianship, all of that. There are five other documents that you should consider. One of them is not a legal document, but it's a nice to have, and it's a long-standing tradition for us as Muslims. In American law, they call it a family declaration, and Islamically they would call it wasiyah. Again, they would call it a testament. So many scholars of the past, earliest probably Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wrote advice to his family and his inheritors about what he wanted to see from them after he was passed away. So we have famous examples of Imam Abu Hanifa leaving advice to his family before he passes away. Imam al-Ghazali leaving advice to his family before he passed away. Abu al-Walid al-Baji, the great scholar of Al-Andalus, a beautiful book that was written to his twin boys. I think it's one of the most amazing small short books that I've ever read. And I think it actually, Al-Ghazali's Ayyuha al-Walad is actually translated. I'm not sure if al-Baji's work is, but it really deserves to be. So you want to say to them in that advice the things that you can't say right now. You want to remember them. You want to remind them to remember Allah, to adhere to their faith, to care for one another, right? To be people that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So that's number one. Number two in your estate planning arsenal is your legally valid Sharia compliant will. You can get one in those three ways. Number three is an advanced medical directive. And what that does is that if you have an incapacity or die, that gives your family the ability to make medical decisions on your behalf that could save your life or save you pain during the dying process. So some people say, you know what, I'm passing away. I don't want any tubes. I don't want any life support. Just leave me be. Your family can present that document and say, this is the wishes of our family member. Allow him or her to die as they wished, and that is that. Number four is called a durable power of attorney. And a durable power of attorney is good for when financial decisions have to be made at the end of life, and you don't have the mindset, or maybe you're not even conscious, and your family needs to make those decisions. I know of a true story where a a gentleman and his wife came to my partner looking for estate planning documents, and you know they had property in the millions, and they thought that a few $1,000s was going to be too much, so they didn't go forward and get a will. They didn't have any type of documentation in place. Well, the brother was hit by a car, permanent vegetative state, unable to make decisions on his own, didn't empower his wife in any way. She really just lived off of her credit cards, was never empowered financially to manage the home. And what happened? She couldn't keep up with the credit cards because she couldn't access the bank account, because she would go to the bank and they would say, sorry, your name's not on the account. She tried to sell the house. Sorry, you can't sell the house. Your name's not on the deed. Or your name's on the deed, but your husband's name is on the deed, and we need him to sign too. Well, he's in a permanent vegetative state. Well, we'll have to wait till he wakes up. House goes under, house is foreclosed on. Eventually, the whole family's out on the street. All of those millions are wasted away because there was not a will, there was not a medical directive, there was not a durable power of attorney that allowed them to function in that very difficult situation. So if you have that type of need, you definitely need to look into that. Number 5 is a trust. And this is a sticking point for a lot of Muslims. A lot of Muslims are like, I heard that I need a trust. Okay, I heard has to be like the most quoted person that I find in the Muslim community. Whether it's dalil that people are bringing, or whether it's a legal issue, I heard is always quoted. Is a very famous anonymous scholar. So I heard is not sufficient enough. You need a trust if one of two things is happening. If you have a special needs child, you definitely need a special needs trust. Please, I implore you, before your child turns 18, if you have a special needs child, go and make sure you form a special needs trust. Why? Because the money that you leave them might end up jeopardizing medical assistance and benefits that they are absolutely necessary for their survival, and they won't be able to apply for them and take care of them if you're passed away. So imagine leaving someone helpless, even more helpless. So apply for a special needs trust. And that definitely needs a lawyer. You should definitely speak to a lawyer, not only in your state, but in their county, because sometimes county laws are very particular to special needs children. Another reason you would need a trust is if you have a lot of money. If you have a net worth of $5 million or more, you need a trust, and you need a lawyer to draft that trust. If you don't, if you don't have that much, having a will is fine. Other than that, you don't need a trust, right? Now, you can always talk to a lawyer and see if it's possible, but don't go in thinking that's what I absolutely must have. It's not a necessity. Your will take care of most of your needs along with these other documents. And then lastly is something called a marital property agreement. And a marital property agreement handles cases when you have conjoined property between you and your spouse. Now, in some states, it's called a joint tenancy with the right of survival for your home, or tenancy in common, as in northern states. Some states consider everything you earn after marriage to be marital property, unless it was gifted or inherited, or you brought it from before the marriage. So what do you do in those situations? It can become very, very sticky. And I'll give you an actual case. I was called to divide the inheritance of a family, a lady who had passed away. And the family was insisting we need to do this Islamically. The daughters, they only had daughters. We need to do this Islamically. All of the family. The husband said, no, Islam is unfair to the woman. She gets less than the man. I won't allow this to happen. So what happened under state law? Well, under state law, he took half of all of the property of his wife. Under state law, then half of the other 50% of his wife's property was divided amongst him and his daughters. So essentially, he took about 2/3 or more of the property. and that 1/3 was divided up amongst his daughters. Amongst that money were gifts that his wife had actually set aside in a safe, gold and jewelry and things like that, that should have never been part of the inheritance to begin with. Where did that go? He took it. So who is really being unfair to women? If it was divided up Islamically, all of that gold valued in the thousands would have gone to the daughters as a right that was gifted to them before any inheritance went out. And then they would have taken 2/3 of the inheritance, and he would have taken 1/3. So we can see that it is extremely important to have something like a marital property agreement, which says, of my property, I share jointly with my husband, jointly with my wife, X, Y, and Z. All of this other property, I don't share it with them. It's mine. It will be distributed to my heirs as I see fit. That way, you're not subjecting everything to this, 50-50 split, and it becomes extremely difficult actually to go through and kind of determine everything at that time. So those are the 6 documents that you should have in an estate plan: a family declaration, an advanced medical directive, a durable power of attorney, a trust if you need it, a marital property agreement if you need it, and lastly, and most importantly, a Sharia compliant, legally valid will that you have properly executed, properly signed in front of witnesses, and them have signed after you. And so that's really what I want to present to everyone today about this topic. And I'd like to open the floor for questions for the remainder of the time, as I'm sure that many people do have questions. So I'll leave that up to you, Imam Wasli.
Inshallah. So anybody who has questions, inshallah ta'ala, you can either feel free to unmute yourself, inshallah, and use your mic, or you can go ahead and put it in the chat if you want to put it in the chat, inshallah ta'ala. So the floor is open for anyone who has questions, inshallah.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So I guess, so a general question, once you put together your wasiyah, what would be a good periodical cadence to review it and update it as applicable? I mean, what would be your recommendation?
So that's a great question, Muhammad. Thank you for asking that. If you have written your will, generally anytime there is a birth or a death in the family or a divorce, you want to update it. Other than that, you don't really have to touch it. Now, I want to point something out, a mistake that people make in drafting their wills, talking about locally, here in the US. Sometimes when they draft the will, they add all of their property into the will. And what that does is, if you've mentioned, well, I own a house at such and such address and a car of such and such type and, stock of such and such amount, when you sell those things and get rid of them, you then have to update your will again. And so you want to avoid having to unnecessarily change the document. It should really only change if there's a divorce, if there's a death, or if there's a birth. And even with the birth, sometimes you can have what's called, future born children clause, which just says, here are my children at the time I wrote this, and any child that's, born and their birth certificate shows that they're my child, they're included. But generally, you should check in on your will, right? Even if you don't change anything, check in on your will 6 months to every 6 months to every year. And also, one thing that we did at my wasiyah, and this is available for free on the website, even if you don't want to use the will application there's a free document called the Asset Inventory and Document Organizer, and has every single document and thing that you can imagine that might be necessary to give your family after you pass away. Download it, print it out, fill out all the information, gather all that documentation, and put it in a safe along with your will, so that if you pass away, whoever you designate to care for you, care for your estate, has pretty much a head start on finding all of the stuff that you need. And then those documents, along with your will, check up on them about every 6 months to a year. Say, oh, well, I switched doctors, I'm going to change the doctor's name. I have a new policy, I'm going to put the new policy in there, so on and so forth.
Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم.
So you have a question here in the chat box. Sheikh Joe says, can you speak on what the basic package of mywasiya.com offers? Do my husband and I need to file our will separately?
So that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking that, Basima. The basic will is $75. If you live in a community property state, you can get the will and the marital property agreement for $99 together. Now, the question that's asked, somebody says, well, my husband has a will, I don't need a will. This is a lot of women say this. Unfortunately, a lot of men tell their wife that too. I have a will, you don't need a will. In Islam, your financial liabilities and rights are separate, meaning that when you pass away, you are judged as an individual. When your husband passes away, he is judged as an individual. And so Islamically, you should have your own wills. Also, as a best practice legally, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not here giving legal advice, but just educating on the possibilities that are there. It is preferable, from the lawyers that I have spoken to on the topic and the experts I've consulted, that you have separate wills as well. Yes, you can do joint wills in some states, but it actually makes it harder to go through all of the property, and there also is better for protecting your assets, both financially as well as Islamically.
Sister Selma, you can ask your question.
Okay, yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for the talks. Yeah, I don't know if you answered this or not, but in regards to the will, like my parents recently separated, and I don't know if it's like related, but you know, like the property in Islam, like and even like American, like how you were saying, like here in America it should be 50-50, but they were under my dad's name, and like the state didn't recognize like my mom was married to him at the time, and the divorce, like they're still under my dad's name and they didn't split it up. So like I don't know, like how could my mom get like her share?
So this is not a case of someone passing away. This is a case of divorce, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so under cases of divorce, that is going to be very state specific, and unfortunately, I'm just not familiar with the rules of the state of New Jersey to be able to opine on that. And I'm not a lawyer as well that practices law in the state of New Jersey, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that. Islamically, if your mother had any property that was her property right, and simply because of it being in your father's name, but she was part owner, she should Islamically still be given that. But that's something that you'll have to make a case for, and then enforce under the laws of the state that you live in, which is why it's so important. Financial literacy for women is to understand what your rights are, and then also, mashallah, so many of our sisters have soft hearts, and they're very giving, and at times, unfortunately, many of our men, they might feel entitled at a divorce to not
Yes.
to not assign property that actually is their ex's to them. So may Allah guide them, and guide everyone to kind of prepare for that situation. So anytime any of the sisters find themselves in those situations, and the man says, "Well, I'll just put it in my name; it'll be fine." No, your name should be on the title. Your name should be there should be documentation, and you should have access to that, because even if you're not going through a divorce or a separation, it's good to have that in case of emergency or Allah forbid, death. So
Yeah.
may Allah make it easy
Jazakallah.
for you. I know that situation is really difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Is there anybody in the community that could like answer like based on what like will, divorce, prenups in Islam, like that?
I would recommend that you speak to someone there. If you're in New Jersey, speak to someone there in New Jersey. That's going to be the best. Find a lawyer there in New Jersey that's specialized in that. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with New Jersey. I live in Texas, so I wouldn't be able to help with that.
Oh, I'm in PA, and like it's just like even Islamically, like I told her I was like she could get a kula, but then in the kula she's gonna have to like give everything up, and it's just like
Yeah,
too
it
much.
sounds like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, even in Pennsylvania, the same applies. It sounds like this is a very involved case and probably not something that we can go into all of the details right now. If you do want to talk to me about some of the Islamic details, I'd be happy to schedule a call with you. You can go to my website, joebradford.net, and there's on the front page, there's a link there that you can get my schedule, and I go over these types of issues with people all the time. But I think that's probably best in a private conversation rather than
Yes.
dealing with it here.
Thank you, Sakura.
My pleasure.
Brother Abdul Rashid, you can ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you just go over the when you talked about if you leave stuff behind that you can't, it can't be willed to your kids or your wife if they're not Muslim. It has to be a gift. I don't. Can you explain that again?
Sure. So, as let's take $100,000 just as a round example, right? If you have, it's your choice as a Muslim to give 1/3 of that amount to anyone that you see fit. So that could be, friends, cousins, whomever that may be. Let's just actually make it 120, because then we'll have round numbers instead of doing 33,333, right? So you've got $40,000 now that you can go and give to basically anybody. Okay. Now, the Prophet ﷺ said, "La yatawarathu ahlu millatayni shatta." Two people of two different faiths don't inherit from each other. So they don't inherit as far as, if my wife is my wife at the time of death, and wives get 1/4 of my wealth, then if she's not a Muslim, she can't take that 1/4 from that 60,000 that's representative of 2/3. That goes to the percentage portion. So what do I do with my non-Muslim wife at that time, or my non-Muslim children? Then what I do is I designate from the charitable gift. So they're actually given before all of the inheritors, and they feel that, I've respected our relationship with them and taken them into consideration, and I can give that to them freely. So there's no problem there. So it's simply which bucket you're going to take the money from.
Okay, so you said, so my wife and my kids, if they're not Muslim, they can't inherit their 1/4 or 1/3.
Yeah, they won't take a percentage of what everybody else that's Muslim would take, but they can take anything you give them from that one, that 1/3. In that 120,000 example, they can take anything up to $40,000.
Then what would I do with the rest of that money?
The rest of the 120,000, that's divided up amongst Muslim relatives.
What if they don't have any Muslim relatives?
Right. What if I don't have any Muslim relatives?
Okay, so I think that's the question then.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So if you don't have any Muslim relatives, then it would be very similar to if what I mentioned during the lecture, that you could leave it all to them, and Allah knows best.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Just
my pleasure.
Vina, you can ask your question, Vina.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
My question was actually similar to what Brother Abdul Rashid just asked, because I'm the only Muslim in my family. So for the past couple of years, I've been like trying to see how I divide my money. Not that I have a lot of money, but when the time comes, to make sure that I was following the prescribed Sharia regarding the will. But then you're saying that doesn't count because they're not Muslim. So all I really need to do is, at that point, it doesn't matter, because I can just give it to them. Is that what you're saying?
You can give them a gift, yes.
Okay. And I think the second part of my question is more the importance of having a will as a convert, because we want to make sure that in that will somewhere, it's recognized that we want to be buried as a Muslim.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And that's stated right in the will?
That is, yes.
Okay. Jazakallah khair.
Wa iyyakum. I see Basma asked a question here in the text box. Says, does Islam differentiate between ownership of property based on whose name is legally on the property or who is actually paid for the property? My family's house is under my name, but I do not pay for the mortgage. Am I considered the owner? So if you are, if you mean by your family's house, if you're talking about you and your husband, then yes, you are part owner of that, because of the value that you add to the family, and that your name was on there confers an ownership right to you. Unless, of course, you yourself have said, I'm only doing this for paperwork reasons, I don't want any part of this, and I don't consider myself an owner of that, then that would not be the case. But in general, if it's between a husband and wife and they purchased the property, then yes, that's going to be considered ownership if your name is on that documentation.
Sheikh Joe, what
Yes,
about let's switch the scenario. Let's flip it. Now,
Okay.
what if the Muslim, who's the only Muslim in their family, is receiving inheritance or has been put on a will from non-Muslim family members?
Okay, so this is a very important question as well, and you know, I think that it's important for us to reckon, just as kind of preface, that as 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 new Muslims, newly practicing Muslims, converts, reverts, people that accepted Islam, whatever you want to call it, many times people will bring up issues in the kind of many of the things that we're talking about today, and they'll act as if this is something that's brand new in the United States. You guys are making up. This is not what the deen is about. Everything I'm telling you right now, I have studied from scholars, and there is a foundation for in our scholarly tradition. Can you imagine that the issue that you just asked, Imam Wesley, has actually been dealt with by the Sahaba themselves? Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, when he was the governor of Greater Syria, dealt with this issue of people accepting Islam and then having non-Muslim family members who then died and left them money. Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, when he was a judge in Yemen, same thing. And their ruling at that time was that if a Muslim is receiving money from their family members that passes away, that they should take that money and then decide what they want to do with it. If they want to give it away in charity, they can give it away in charity. If they want to keep it, they can keep it. Why? Why did they say that? Because they said at that time, Syria, Yemen, those were areas where were on the borders of Islam. You had some people that were Muslim, some people that were sympathetic to Muslims, some people that were fighting Muslims. They said, we don't want this money to go to people that eventually would fund them to fight Muslims more. So the Muslim, not as inheritance, but as simply saving this money from going and strengthening people who might use it for sin or disbelief, should take that money and then make a judgment call. Should I take this and just give it away in charity? Should I take this, give it in the path of dawah? Should I take this? I have no other money and live off of it. That's a judgment call that's made at that time. But if you have a family member that is passing away and you are given inheritance from, it is okay for you to take that money. Now, I want to mention something outside of the realm of rules. I want to talk about just out of etiquette and demeanor, because I've been there. I'm sure many of you have been there. Some of us, we'll hear that the Prophet ﷺ said, no two people of different faiths should inherit from each other. And so we say to our non-Muslim family members, I'm not going to inherit from you. You're a kafir, right? Don't leave me anything in your will. Don't put anything in your will for me. Not only did we just give extremely bad da'wah, but we spoke out of turn as far as knowledge goes. So that money that they're leaving is either going to be, as we said, there are two types of money that's left behind, either gifts or inheritance. If it's a gift that they give you, if you're named as giving you a car, giving you whatever, you're allowed to take that without question. If it's inheritance, according to some kind of rule, some rules that they're following in their religious tradition or legal tradition, then that's where that situation that I mentioned from Muawiyah and Mu'adh and others is applicable. So don't be so certain to one uh, um, be off-putting to them, because all they want to do is show you kindness, right? And secondly, use that as an opportunity to thank them and call them to Islam before they pass, right? And mention to them, use that as an opportunity to talk to them about the reality of death, to talk to them about what will happen at that time, and to call them to Islam. So a lot of us, we get so in tune with the rules that we put up a wall, and that wall actually stops us from even greater things. So what I'm saying is this, I guess maybe if I'm rambling, I'll say this. If a relative comes and says, I've put you in my will, use that as an opportunity to talk to them about death. Perhaps Allah will guide them on your hands before they pass away. And if money does come and you don't feel comfortable with taking it because it came from them, take it, but give it away in charity. Do something with it. If it's written for you as a specific type of gift in their last will and testament, you can take it. There's no problem with that. But just be cognizant of the effect that your words can have on other people, especially at sensitive times like that.
Sister Jessica, you may ask your question.
Assalamualaikum. Jazakallah here for this meeting and this conversation we're having. It actually is similar to the question that we do have on the group chat, and I'd rather just ask that as well. Are stocks inheritable, and does one need a lawyer to draft a will for that? And having stocks under your name, would applicable the 1/3 as wasiha, or giving it to your family members or your children?
So when you pass away, in your will, you're going to appoint someone known as an administrator or an executor. And that person is going to be entrusted with surveying all of your property and finding out what you own and what you don't own, what's considered inheritance and what's not considered inheritance. And anything that has not been gifted, deeded, or sold at the time of death will be part of your inheritance. So if you've said, hey, I've got this special necklace, everybody knows I've given this to my sister, I'm just holding it for her, then that's a gift to her, right? If it's been deeded, you put their name on the deed to the home or your car, then that's theirs. Even before you died, you're just holding it. You've sold it, obviously. Anything else, including stocks, right, would enter your estate and then would be divided up amongst your estate. Now, whoever divides your estate would then decide, is it going to be better for me to sell it off and just give everybody cash? Or can I just transfer that, transfer the account to some people or not? And that'll be decided at that time.
So you have a question here, Sheikh Joe, by Jacob. Is it okay for my only Muslim brother to receive my inheritance and for him to give it to my non-Muslim wife and child?
Yes, that's fine.
Next question. What is the Islamic view on bonds versus trusts?
Can you explain a little bit more?
Yes. I want to know, because there is some views regarding bonds being not Islamically correct, if you want to put it that way, and it's better to have trust. So I wanted to know versus each other, what is the point of view Islamically correct, I would say.
So let me clarify from you. Are you saying that a person has a choice to either buy a bond to protect their money or put the money into a trust?
Correct.
Okay. So yes, bonds are fixed income assets that are essentially loans to whomever issued the bond, and you receive interest on them over time, and they are traded and exchanged. So fixed income and bonds should be avoided completely. If you need to protect some money for the sake of leaving it for inheritors, then going about it through a trust or a gift, or even a simple transfer agreement is preferable than introducing something or I'm sorry, putting that money into something which is interest bearing. And Allah knows best.
So you have another question here. When you designate charity from your estate without specifying a specific recipient, can you name an executor who will give it in charity at their discretion based upon what they perceive as the greater need?
Yes, Muhammad, that is an excellent question, and that is definitely okay. You simply would just, mention that in your will. And my administrator or executor can distribute this, up to X amount of dollars or X percentage of my estate to the charities that they see fit.
Any other questions, inshallah?
No, Jazakallah, this has been very, very beneficial. So I know you had made mention, Shaykh, that some topics are a little bit outside of the scope of this shorter class. It would call for maybe a longer class that goes into more details. Do you have any plans on offering classes in the future that might go into more details, inshallah?
So there is almost like a weekend long kind of course just around Islamic estate planning that I do. And that doesn't even include the whole, number of percentages and how it's divided up in the different cases and things like that. That really takes like a couple of weeks to go over. But I would be happy to organize something like that online or in person. If you guys see fit.
Inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Barakallahu feekum.
Any other questions, inshallah ta'ala?
Yes. Which penthouse are you in New York right now? Because that background, mashallah.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. The Zoom penthouse, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. Well, barakallah feek, Sheikh Joe, for alhamdulillah, that beautiful presentation and the great lecture and the mashallah great responses for the questions, inshallah ta'ala. Just as a reminder for everybody again as well, mywasiya.com. You can go there and check out the website. I posted it here in the chat box for everybody. Don't delay, like Sheikh Joe mentioned, even if you have to take out that piece of paper tonight and write it down on that piece of paper to start with, and then tomorrow you get busy on trying to figure out what you're going to do with your assets and your estates and everything else that you have, inshallah. But inshallah ta'ala, make sure that you take care of those things, inshallah ta'ala. And Sheikh Joe, his website is here as well, just in case you want to link up with him and ask him any personal questions, inshallah. Sheikh Joe, any final remarks from you?
I would just encourage everyone, and since we did talk a lot of questions about Muslims and non-Muslim family members and things like that, I think the most important advice that I was given early on in my Islam, and that is to empower myself with knowledge. And especially with very sensitive things like this, don't leave them to the last minute. Allow yourself to understand the nuances and the flexibility of our faith and our faith's legal tradition, and also to understand, how you fit into that, and empower yourself with knowledge before that knowledge is scarce, or before you're going to need that knowledge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless each and every one of you and allow you to learn, apply, and increase yourselves and your families with good in this life and the next.
Joe, we have one more hand that came up. Would you mind taking that question, inshallah?
Not at all.
Marketing.
Assalamu alaikum, Imam Wesley. This is Hussein.
Dr. Hussein, mashallah, barakallahu feek.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Hussein Ahmed. I am the president of Mass New York. Imam Wesley, Jazakallah khairan. Sheikh Joe, Jazakallah khairan. Barakallahu feek. In behalf of Mass New York, Muslim American Society of New York, actually, first we thank Imam Wesley for bringing you here to us. Second, Imam Joe, Jazakallah khairan. Wallahi, I hear a lot of lecture about Islamic Will in America here, but today is totally different, and subhanallah, I really enjoy it. And it's mashallah, it's very knowledgeable, and also it's very practical to our society here, because a lot of people talking about the will from the old things about something is very old, sometimes not even related to our society here in America. But what you said is actually what we're facing every day and every week, inshallah. Inshallah, in the future, as the brother mentioned, and Imam Musli, inshallah, we can have maybe course or something about this one for our society, the whole society, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Imam Joe, in behalf of Mass, and Jazakallah khairan, Imam Musli, for bringing this important topics, inshallah.
Well, Jazakallah khair. I'm not an imam, but my pleasure to have met your acquaintance and to be in your company and the company of everyone here. And anything that I can do to benefit and to help, I'm really happy to be there and to offer that service. And Jazakallah khair for your points. I really appreciate the kind words.
So inshallah, Shaykh Joe, we'll be on a call, inshallah ta'ala, to see how we can maybe set something up for a weekend program, inshallah ta'ala.
Looking forward to it. Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallahu feekum, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all. Thank you for attending, inshallah, our Mass New York Reward to Reconnect program. We are going to present and put out more of these type of programmings, inshallah ta'ala. Keep a lookout for them. Keep safe out there, inshallah. Take care of yourselves and your families during this time, and may Allah continue to protect you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.